Welcome to the Binger, Disney fans! Disney has been churning out animated movies for almost a century, and yet very few of them take place in the present day. More often than not, they're located in some distant historical period that we've only learned about in books. Disney often uses these historical settings to make characters look exotic and interesting. However, the characters are rarely completely historically accurate. Sometimes Disney takes slight liberties, while other times they get things completely wrong. In this video, we're taking a look at some examples of historically inaccurate Disney characters, and showing you what the characters should have actually looked like. Frozen is a recent addition to the Disney canon, but the movie is set almost 200 years ago in the late 1830s. Although the Kingdom of Arendelle, where Anna and Elsa live, isn't a real place, the filmmakers have said it's somewhere in Scandinavia. They also said they were inspired by 1840s fashion, yet their design for Elsa's dress isn't exactly spot on. So artist Wakefield took it upon herself to come up with a period-appropriate coronation gown for Elsa. Some might wonder why she didn't choose to redesign Elsa's iconic ice gown, but there's no historical precedent for that, something the artist herself points out. So for the coronation gown, Wakefield took her cues from Victorian fashion of the period. The pleated neckline, the teal color, the brooch, and the necklace that mimics the neckline's decoration all nod to the style of the day. Also, since Victorian evening wear was allowed to be a little adventurous, Elsa's sleeves are short. And it turns out that Elsa's gloves were actually historically accurate, although Wakefield took the liberty of embellishing Elsa's gloves with the kind of embroidery that would have been seen during that period. Of all the Disney princesses, Jasmine's outfit in Aladdin is perhaps the most inaccurate for the time when the movie likely takes place. It's true we don't know precisely when that is, no one specifically says what year it is in the movie. However, there are several clues that give us an idea. First of all, the Arabic greeting salam is used by multiple characters. Second, the opening number Arabian Nights makes it pretty clear that the movie must take place in an Arabic-speaking country. And finally, when Genie turns Aladdin into Prince Ali, he comments,
"That fez and vest combo is much too 3rd century.
Which means Aladdin must be set in at least the 4th century. All that means that Aladdin took place in pre-Islamic Arabia, which was extremely conservative. Jasmine never would have shown her belly or walked around without a head covering. Instead, she would have worn loose clothing due to the extreme heat. And as a woman of the upper class, she would have worn a veil. Sometimes that veil would have covered all but one of her eyes, although a veil covering the hair was acceptable as well. Jasmine could also show her high status by using better fabrics and more elaborate designs for her clothing. Still, she would have kept things modest and loose-fitting. She would never show off her body like she does in the movie. Another image by Wakefield gives a far better idea of what Jasmine might have actually worn at the time. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the very first Disney feature film. It also started the tradition of setting stories in distant historical periods. In this case, the film most likely took place in Germany at some point in the middle or late 1500s. What are the clues that lead us to that conclusion? The carved wooden furniture in the dwarves' home along with the nature seen in the film are reminiscent of Germany's Black Forest region. Plus, the dwarfs yodel, and yodeling was not recorded until 1545. That means the movie must have taken place after that. During this time period, Germany was still part of the Holy Roman Empire. However, Protestant reformations were happening throughout the country, and the mood was conservative and religious. Women were wearing waist-emphasizing dresses and dark fabrics that included high necklines and exaggerated shoulders and hips. Also, their hair was often pulled back. Some even covered it with a headpiece. This image by Claire Hummel, who also goes by the screen name Shumla, does a good job showing what Snow White's dress and headpiece might look like. One of the most difficult movies to pin down historically is Mulan. According to artist Claire Hummel, the legend takes place during the Wei dynasty, but the Huns weren't a threat until the Western Han dynasty. And there are several other pieces of evidence that make things even more confusing, so it's really hard to use the context provided by the movie to specifically determine when it's supposed to take place. So Hummel decided that instead of placing Mulan in a specific time period, she'd create an image that put her in appropriate textiles. Artist Wakefield took things one step further, however. She determined that Mulan had to take place during the Xiongnu War, which happened during the Han Dynasty from 206 to 200 AD. Most of what's known about the fashion of the period is from terracotta sculptures. These show women wearing wrap dresses with large sleeves. Also, both men and women of the period grew out their hair to demonstrate filial piety. So the only difference between men and women's hair would have been that men wore theirs in a top knot. This style was fairly accurately represented in the movie. However, at the time, cutting someone's hair was considered a punishment and would have been a sign of disgrace. So a historically accurate Mulan would never have chopped off her hair like she does in the film. Wickfield's period-specific drawing of Mulan represents all these historical considerations. While Mulan created quite a guessing game about when it took place, the time period when Moana existed was made very clear in the movie. The film is set in the 1st century in the islands of Western Polynesia. While the film drew inspiration from the culture of Hawaii and New Zealand, artist Wickfield points out that those places wouldn't have been discovered yet. So it would actually be more historically accurate to focus on islands that were settled at the time, like Tonga and Samoa. At the time, men and women in Western Polynesia wore sarongs made from a material called bark cloth. Bark cloth was made from mulberry tree pulp and had a paper-like quality. The most well-made clothes was reserved for royalty like Moana. Also, although it was Maui who sported tattoos in the movie, tattoos were actually a pretty important part of Polynesian culture. And someone like Moana likely would have had several on her shoulders, arms, and chest. This image by Wickfield showcases Moana with these historically accurate changes. Sleeping Beauty is another film that specifically identifies its time period. There are subtle clues like the illuminated manuscript with gold leafing that opens at the start of the film. Also, when she's hidden away, Princess Aurora is referred to as Briar Rose, a rose that grows in England. On top of that, when Prince Philip makes his case for being with Aurora, who he thinks is a peasant, to his father he says,
"Now, Father, you're living in the past. This is the 14th century."
Taken together, all of this leads to the conclusion that the movie is set in the 1300s in England. When Aurora came back to the palace, she would find her whole life changed as aristocrats had much more restrictive lives than peasants. She would also have found she would need a complete wardrobe overhaul as upper-class women and peasants wore very different clothing. For the first time, women could wear dresses with fitted sleeves and bodices. On top of that, they would wear loose robe-like dresses called surcoats. These could be worn open so the fitted dress underneath could still be seen. The surcoats were also often sleeveless or included a long train. Meanwhile, brooches would decorate the bodices of the fitted dresses. Women would do their hair in vertical braids near their ears, and they would sometimes adorn the style with veils or crowns. Pocahontas was a real historical figure, so we know the exact time and place of her story. John Smith arrived in Virginia in 1607 when Pocahontas, the daughter of a Powhatan chief, was only about 11 years old. Powhatan women would have worn far less than Pocahontas in the film. Her outfit would have consisted of a deerskin wrapped around her waist and strings of white shell beads around her neck. When it got cold in the winter, a leather cloak might have been added to the ensemble. Also, unlike Pocahontas in the movie, unmarried Powhatan women would wear their hair in a single long braid. Once they were wed, they'd cut their hair short. Someone like Pocahontas who had high status in the tribe would also likely sport tattoos with abstract patterns on her face and body. Since Pocahontas was a real girl, this is an image of her. Disney could have used this image as an inspiration for their movie about her, but chose to go in a different direction. Of course, the movie's story wasn't historically accurate, so it's not a surprise that Pocahontas doesn't look historically accurate either. There are more than a few clues that The Princess and the Frog takes place in the 1920s in New Orleans. Not only is Tiana's mom referred to as the finest seamstress in New Orleans, the jazz, cars, and clothes are all straight out of the Jazz Age. In fact, one of the biggest historical inaccuracies in the movie had nothing to do with the characters' looks. In the 1920s, New Orleans was a segregated city, so unfortunately Tiana and Charlotte never would have been best friends. Of course, Tiana's clothes aren't completely accurate to the period either. Tiana spends most of the film as a little green frog, so clothes are the least of her issues. However, when she was human, as a woman of the 1920s, she would have worn a straight dress with a dropped waist. She also might have chosen to do her hair in a short bob, the haircut of choice at the time, and it was often topped with a tiny little hat or hairpiece. Claire Hummel captures the look perfectly in this image, all while maintaining Tiana's signature green. Beauty and the Beast is one of the most beloved Disney animated movies ever. Yet even though it's a tale as old as time, it's still set in a specific time and place. We know the movie takes place in France because Lumiere tells us so.
They can sing, they can dance. After all, miss, this is France.
As for the date, when Cogsworth takes Belle on a tour of the castle, he discusses its architectural style.
The pseudo facade was stripped away to reveal a minimalist rococo design.
Which places the movie between the 1600s and 1700s. We also know Beast is a prince, so the story would have had to have taken place before the French Revolution in 1789. Aristocrats of the time period, like Marie Antoinette, wore dresses that included tight corsets and poofy hips. The style of the day also included huge, powdered white hairdos and powdered faces with rouged cheeks. This image by Claire Hummel shows the exaggerated dresses Belle would have worn once she married the Beast. Which of these historically accurate looks do you like the best? Are there any other Disney characters that don't look historically accurate? Tell us about it in the comments! And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Binger. And hey, thanks for watching.